And thank you for joining us for the AltDev Student Summit. We're pleased to present Mike Jungbluth. Note that you can submit some questions on Google Moderator link that we've posted on the live page. We'll address these at the end during the Q&A. Also, feel free to join our discussion on Twitter with the AltDevConf hashtag. So without further interruption, I'd like to turn it over to Mike.
Hi, my name, as she said, is Mike Jungbluth, and I am a senior animator at ZeniMax Online Studios. A little bit about me: I've been working in games since 2006, and in that time I've been part of 7 games that have shipped, 2 that were canceled, and 1 more that is currently in development, which is the Elder Scrolls Online. I've worked on RPGs, action games, and first-person shooters. I am also a co-host on a semi-irregular Reanimators podcast, and I am a severely lapsed poster on AltDev Blog-A-Day. All of that is really just to say that I know a little bit about game animation, and I have no problem running my mouth about it. So let's dig into what game animation is all about. First, let's establish what part of game development animators are actually responsible for. Well, it's for making all the things move in the game. This primarily consists of the characters in the game, but depending on physics, the things on them and the things in the world could also be left up to an animator's control. We do this by moving every joint on every frame and then setting a key on a timeline that then records that joint's placement. There are 12 principles of animation that create the DNA of every motion we craft. For anyone interested in learning those, Wikipedia is a good place to start. But The Illusion of Life by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston is where it was first introduced. A strong knowledge of body mechanics is pretty much fundamentally required for what we do. But making things move is actually the easy part of our job. The challenge is making how they move convey their intention. And with games, their intention is directed by the game design. So we have to think about, are they an enemy or an ally? Are they meant to be powerful or weak? Fast or slow? A main character or one in the background? How they move should always reflect their purpose in the world and in the game. So if their intent is directed by design, then how they convey that intent is where we really get to leave our mark as animators and get excited about what we do. So, does the character enjoy what they do? Or are they scared of those around them? What are they thinking about while they're doing whatever it is they're designed to do? Moving a character makes it look like it is alive, but giving it a personality makes it feel alive, and that's animation. So now that we know what an animator does, we can break down what those responsibilities actually are across the entire animation team. So first up is, well, animators. This includes junior animators, mid-level, seniors, leads, animation directors. These are the people that are responsible for creating the movement and personality you actually see in the game. Next up, and what seems to confuse some people, is technical animators. Tech animators are what enable us as animators to actually do our job and animate them. They take the models, add a skeleton to them, and place a rig on top of them with controls that we actually then use to animate. They also create the tools that we use to help speed up our animation process. Technical animators are the least understood role outside of the department. And without a doubt, they are the unsung heroes of the animation department. A good TA is worth their weight in gold, and they don't get nearly enough credit for how awesome they are. There's also a distinction between cinematic animators and real-time in-game animators. Cinematic animators often have higher poly models with more controls to allow for higher fidelity in their animation. Like film, they work to a fixed camera, which allows for such luxuries as higher poly models because they don't have to be rendered in real time. Because there's also no AI or player input, the animations are able to be crafted as one long sequence, allowing for fluid, purposeful movement and emotions. They get to use all 12 of the animation principles in their purest form. With game animators, you have a lot more constraints placed on them. Because their animation is played in real time, often from any camera angle the player chooses, and they always choose the best, of course. And because the player is controlling them, or an AI is, the animations are often many individual smaller assets that are strung together on the fly to create the movement you see in-game. Because of this, in-game animators must find ways to adapt the 12 principles of animation into other areas of game development. But more on that later. So, tools of the trade, or where do we get these wonderful toys? So first up, of course, are the software packages. And these are what we actually use to animate. For 3D, the most prolific are Maya and 3D Studio Max. For 2D, it is Flash. But what program you use really isn't that important. Everyone has their preferences, and depending on the strength of your technical animators, certain programs can be better than others, but ultimately, all you need to animate is the ability to move a character around on the screen and set some keyframes. All programs really offer this, so learn one and you can adapt to any other. I've ranted about how silly people can get about software preferences actually on AltDev blog a day, with my post titled "My Cat is Better Than Your Dog." So I won't get into it here. I know you're all quite sad, but you can read it there if you want. So after the animation is done, implementation is a key part of our job. With newer engines and pipelines, oftentimes the export process is a 1 or 2 button affair. And then there is a database in the editor that allows you to add the animations without too much effort. From this point, though, how involved the animator can become is up to them and the division of labor at studios. The more tools you can have to adjust blend times, FX or audio tags, and matrices that speak to which animations play with others is a really powerful but potentially time-consuming trade-off. Like software packages, knowing one engine gives you the skills to pick up another without too many problems. We animators are pretty lucky that way. All right, so now comes the part where we actually get to craft the animation and all the other stuff's out of the way. The planning, the tools, the pipeline, they're all established, and now we can just get right into it and animate. So how do we do that? Well, first option that a lot of people love is keyframe animation, which is when you take a model that's got a rig in it and handcraft each pose and motion. There are 2 main approaches to how we do this, known as pose to pose and straight ahead. Pose to pose is when you create a storyboard of sorts of the action, breaking down the key poses that you see. You do this to establish timing and general direction, not worrying about the bits in between. You block out the entire action first, and after you have it where you like it, you can then go back in and add the in-betweens and polish it up and make it pretty. This is a really production-friendly method that allows natural iteration of stages throughout the process. Straight ahead animation is when you craft the entire animation in a linear fashion, establishing not only the key poses, but the breakdowns and in-betweens as well. This is a more organic method of work that can allow for happy accidents, but can easily get out of control if you aren't constantly aware of everything going on. Depending on the action, there are times one method works better than the other, and oftentimes it's actually a combination of the two that produces the best results. All right, so you have keyframe and then you have motion capture, or also known as performance capture, which is, of course, when an actor's actions are recorded by the use of markers placed on their body that are triangulated by cameras to track the movement. The result is data that has a key on every frame, on every joint. The main task of a mocap animator, then, is to take that data, retime it, push some of the poses, and clean up any pops or missing information, such as fingers. By the nature of this process, it's easy to see why most animators prefer keyframe over mocap. There is an authorial intent that you have with keyframe as an animator that oftentimes isn't present or is at best shared with the actor. This, of course, is also why directors and producers love it so much, because you can quickly see something moving and have an asset available that conveys the intent of the design really quickly. But like anything, it is only as worthwhile as the actor and the director giving the performance. And if neither are very well prepared or versed in the needs of the game or the performance of the character, the resulting data can actually set an animator back because of the massive amount of rework we would need to do to make it match the needs of the game. All this is really just to say there's no silver bullet when it comes to animation. And like the methods of keyframe, which are pose to pose and straight ahead, each way kind of has their applications, and sometimes it's a combination of the two that yield the best results. And then something that's becoming a lot more common is procedural animation. This is the idea that the joints of a character can be programmatically driven without the need for animators to create unique assets for each action. Again, like mocap, it has its strengths and weaknesses. Where procedural animation works great is when an actual force is driving the movement. Hit reactions are, of course, a big win, as they allow unique visuals appropriate to the force that came in contact with them. They are reactionary to a force outside their own body, which is exactly how the animation is being driven. Procedural animation also allows for new types of gameplay. Again, the intent matches the outcome. But where they can't replace the animator is when it comes to emotional engagement. Even performance capture struggles with this yet. There is something about seeing the fingerprints of an animator, of the artist, that gives a character a heart. Remember, making a character move is only part of an animator's job. And while it can be a labor-intensive process, it is actually the intent and personality of an animation that makes it come to life. So, like with everything, of course, it's a combination of every single method that can allow for responsive and emotive characters to exist as the scope of games grow. Alright, so if all that sounded cool, and you know how to animate, awesome. What else do you need to know to be a successful animator in games? Well, having a solid understanding about the fundamental of art is pretty key. I personally come from a traditional arts background and learned how to animate with a pencil and paper. Knowing how to draw was obviously essential for that, and while 3D doesn't require the actual ability to draw, to at least understand what makes for a good piece of art helps when figuring out the structure and pose of a character. Having some familiarity with modeling doesn't hurt either. Being able to look at a model and notice if there will be issues that will make your job as an animator more difficult are important to be able to call out. Shoulder pads that are too large and would make it hard to move the head side to side, or large canisters on the side of a leg that would create a lot of clipping issues are the sort of things that help to be called out at the concept stage or in the proxy modeling stage as opposed to a final model. And then, of course, game design. For me, this is the big one as an animator. In my view, you should be a game developer first and an animator second. Understanding the core mechanics of the game and being able to discuss with designers how an animation can convey that is wildly important. And luckily, the 12 principles that govern animation can be applied almost one-to-one to game design. This allows you to understand when a designer asks you to change the timing of an animation, that it isn't because they want you to make your animation look worse. It is because they want it to play better, and it's up to you to make it play the way they want, but still look the way you want. Because of this give and take, understanding how to adapt the principles of animation to game design is paramount. I actually wrote a series of blogs that went into that, which I've shown the link here. Core animation principles like anticipation, follow-through, and staging are left up to the design of the game or the player. So you must learn how to use those to your advantage to sell your animation and performance. Unlike film, where a character's performance is asking the audience merely to be engaged, we're asking them to engage and respond so that we can then do the same. Animation is responsible for much of that feedback on both ends. So if those animations are created in a vacuum without a deep understanding of game design, the conversation between game developer and player isn't going to be as rich as it could be. And then, of course, the other wrinkle for game animators is AI and programming. While this certainly overlaps with design, there are oftentimes, as an animator, you want animations to play in a specific order or want the characters to respond in a specific way. But the tech isn't always able to accommodate, or it can, but because programmers don't think the way animators do, it wasn't set up that way. Having a strong relationship and understanding with programmers can lead actually to all sorts of magic, though, that neither one could really create on their own. Even though we often see things different ways, our vision is always the same. All right, so what does a typical day look like then for an animator to take an idea, say, from concept to completion? So first off, oftentimes you'll get a request directly from either the designer that needs it or your lead animator. It could be for a one-off animation or an entire character suite. Immediately, you want to ask as many questions as possible to make sure you understand the intent of the design. How many frames should it be? What will the player before and after it be seeing? How reliant is this on effects? How soon do you need it? You can never ask too many questions when you first be given a task. Once you understand the intent of the animation, set out to do some research, both on the tech and personality side of things. If it is a new rig, test it out some first. Talk to another animator or rigger that has worked on it to find out what all it can do and maybe what it can't do so well. Then do some research about the type of animation you'll be creating. If it's an action shot, look up appropriate fight styles or types of movement. If it's an acting shot, act it out yourself or get somebody else to act it out to try a bunch of different scenarios for how it would work. Researching different cultures, emotions, and ideas is what will take an animation from being flat to awesome. And then the sooner you can get something into game that reflects what the final animation will look like, the better. This gives design a chance to play around with it and make sure it actually fits their intent. This also gives FX and audio something to work with, which sometimes is needed to really sell the moment. Oftentimes, you'll find something that doesn't work or needs to be retimed once you actually see it in game. So the less amount of time you spend invested on an animation up front, the better in case something needs to change. And then once any necessary design or aesthetic adjustments have been made, you just simply polish off the animation to whatever the appropriate point is and pass the creation down the line to effects and audio so they can add their finishing touches. Then start the process all over on your next task. Animation's pretty lucky. It's kind of right in the middle of the pipeline. So, we're relying on people. We've got some other people relying on us, but we kind of get this beautiful middle area where we get to work with everybody. All right, well, if you want to dig deeper on any of this stuff I've talked about, these here would be a good place to start. For animation, the Bible we use is the Animator Survival Kit by Richard Williams. Can't stress strongly enough how amazing that book is for teaching everything you need to get up and running with animation. The two game design books that have influenced me the most are The Art of Game Design by Jesse Schell and Game Feel by Steve Swink. Both do an amazing job of breaking down design fundamentals in an artist-friendly manner. And then finally, my AltDev blog-a-day posts are a cornucopia of random animation and design music. So, does anyone have any questions?
All right, so at the moment, the audience is a bit shy, but I can go ahead and get you started. Now, I know you've mentioned software briefly. There seems to be a lot more software out there now, specifically for animation, than there ever was. Do you think this just, do you think it's more beneficial that there's more software, or that it causes more problems like you talked about before with people not agreeing on what software is best?
I think if there's more options for people to try, then somebody's going to probably, grok something sooner than maybe another one, right? I think the biggest thing people have to realize, learn whatever you feel comfortable using to get up and running. But realize at a certain point, you're going to be going into a studio or you're going to be working with somebody who doesn't use that, and you need to be able to adapt. Uh, Ultimately, you come into a job, they want you to animate. They don't really care how you animate it or whatever you do. But you just kind of need to be comfortable picking it up and learning it. So use whatever you want at first, but try not to get too attached to it because you're probably going to have to use something else at some point.
Great advice. Now we do have a question from the audience here. It seems like a lot of what you said was for 3D animation. Is 2D animation different or similar under these things you've mentioned?
2D is actually really similar. I mean, you're still essentially creating a suite of smaller animations for a character. You're just, using again like a different program. Obviously, that one you really do need to learn how to draw, or I guess you could have somebody else draw the characters in Flash, and maybe you can just move them. I've never really used a lot of Flash myself. Everything I did was pencil and paper, and that last time I did that was in college. So I've never actually done it in a production space. But I mean, you look at 2D games versus 3D games. At the core, they're crafting their animation pipeline in pretty much the same way.
All right. Very good thoughts on that. Now, another audience member asks, what's the best way to go about building a portfolio if you don't yet know what area of animation you'll be employed in?
The best thing when it comes to building a portfolio or reel is just like 100% look at the work as if it's somebody else's and critique it as honestly as you would if it was like the person you least liked in your animation class, right? Be critical. Be honest with yourself, because if you see something wrong in your work, somebody else who's reviewing it, they're going to see it too, without a doubt. So put your best work out there. At that point, if you know good animation, somebody's going to want to hire you. I had no mocap experience to speak of when I got my first job with mocap, and they can teach you that, right? They can say, okay, you understand timing, you understand weight, you understand a good performance, you know how to make clean arcs. We can teach you how to do that on top of mocap, right? So really, if you really focus on the core of animation and do that great, people are going to go, I'll bring you in, I'll train you, I'll teach you my tools, I'll teach you our pipeline, I'll teach you how to adapt that to something else, especially when they see you're junior, because they're going to get a lot of return for that investment. So don't fret about well I don't have enough of this as far as tools and stuff. Just do the best work. As far as actual work that you should probably have on your reel though, you're going to want a lot of good action stuff. So run cycles, walks, jumps, some action stuff. So characters with swords and make them do attacks and swinging it and whatnot. And then also, a couple acting type things are helpful as well, right? So, take a line of dialogue from your favorite movie or whatever, or go to like 11 Second Club, and every month they have lines of dialogue, and animate an acting test for that as well. Unless you're doing cinematics, you probably won't get to do that much, but it's at least showing the people when you're doing in-game stuff, oh, he's aware of performance. He's thinking about, or she's thinking about these subtleties. And that's an important thing to show, because some of that will leak into your in-game work as well.
One last quick related question. Is there anything you've seen on a demo reel that absolutely turned you off?
Besides like work that I didn't think was very good, no. So here's some things that do hang some people up though. Make sure your music is fairly tame, right? There's some things like crazy, ridiculous electronic music that'll drive certain people nuts, right? You kind of have to be aware of, look at a song style or types of music and go, does this annoy anybody? And if it does, don't put it on your reel, because that's probably the person who's going to be watching it and giving you a job. So that's number one. Number two is there are definitely some places that if your reel is like too violent, they're not gonna be interested. So say you work on an M-rated game that has people getting like decapitated and stuff. You're probably, if you were to take that reel and apply to like Disney, they're gonna go ooh, and they're gonna step back a little bit and be a little turned off by it. So that's something to think about as well. But I mean, use your better judgment. If look at the type of games that's being made at the studio you're applying, and show work that's in theme with that. Don't go over what it is that they're making. So, and then one last quick thing I did want to talk about and mention is for anyone else that's also really interested in this stuff but wants to dig a lot deeper. We're setting up and working with GDC this year to do an animation boot camp, which will be a one-day event, which will be essentially 8 hours of tons of different animators in the industry really getting into the nitty-gritty of stuff. So that's something to be on the lookout for as well.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you so much, Mike, and thank you
Thank
all
you.
for joining us. Please stay tuned for our upcoming sessions. They'll be on the Watch Live page, and I hope you're all enjoying AltDev Student Summit. Thank you.
Thanks.